A little offending never hurt anybody. Charles M. Schulz, American cartoonist and creator of the comic strip Peanuts. All right, welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. Well, if you were paying attention over the weekend, you heard that President Biden has withdrawn from the race. How exciting is that? Very, very exciting. Very exciting that he is withdrawn and he endorsed Kamala Harris. I don't have a boo, but we should. I, I would do a boo if I had one. I wasn't prepared for the boo part. But anyway, so just know that there was like a boo, sound to go along with that. Now, what's interesting is the memes, the mockery, the jokes. Oh my God, you guys, you guys are intense. It was totally off the hook. It was just like I just was scrolling and I was like, "Holy," I would say, "Holy wow," and then I'm like, "All right, well, that was pretty rough." And then maybe a few minutes later, I'd look and like, "Wow," I wouldn't it's just like just wow after wow after wow, because some of y'all are rough. And look, no argument here. I'm all for it, actually. In fact, I would go as far as encouraging it. Now, before I tell you about why I encourage it, even though I generally try to keep a family friendly show, so I'm not going to show any of some of the worst ones on there, but I do try to keep a family friendly show. But at the same time, I I support this. But I want to read what he had to say. He put out a comment. I'm saying, well, it was funny. Like some people noted that President Biden just basically tweeted it out. I mean, we know it wasn't really President Biden. It was, some staffer or somebody that's working on his campaign. I think there was a news article about a week and a half ago, and it was kind of funny because it was like, did you know that President Biden, is he's not tweeting his own stuff. It's actually this 20-some-year-old person. And it was kind of funny because I was like, well, yeah, of course. He's a president. He's busy doing, president stuff, not playing on Twitter. And why would he bother? Why would he really, like this is a very common thing. So the idea that I should be surprised that the president isn't tweeting his own stuff is not surprising. It's funny in a way. But he put out a tweet, and then the campaign put out a statement, which he signed, and people are like, the conspiracy theorists were like, did he really sign that? Look at his signature. It looks like doesn't look like some of his other signatures. Like, well, I don't know. I'm like, if the guy is got dementia, right? If he's just declining cognitively because of old age, then I would imagine that his signature might not look the same as well. We've been making fun of him for like months now for being incapable of doing the most basic task, like leaving the podium and going the right direction. We've been making fun of him, so like it doesn't surprise me that his signature would look different. So I'm not really engaging in the conspiracy theory on that. But here's what he said. Let's put it up on the screen. We'll read it. We'll read it together just in case you haven't seen it. And it was a fine statement, I suppose. And let's see what we got here. It says, my fellow Americans, I'm not gonna be able to read that the way it is. Give me a second. Let me pull this up in a different so I can actually read it because I see that I'm covering over some of the text, which is fine, except I don't want to try to read it. All right, so here we go. It says, my fellow Americans, over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress as a nation. Okay. Today, America has the strongest economy in the world. We've made historic investments in rebuilding our nation, in lowering prescription drug costs for seniors, and in expanding affordable health care to a record number of Americans. We've provided critically needed care to a million veterans exposed to toxic substances. Man, I cannot talk today. passed the first gun safety law in 30 years. Well, that's definitely a boo. Appointed the first African American woman to the Supreme Court and passed the most significant climate legislation in the history of the world. America has never been better positioned to lead the world, to lead than we are today. I feel like every president at some point basically says that. I mean, they may not say those specific things, but they'll talk about what they claim to be their record is, and they'll be like, well, we're in such a better shape than we were, when that guy was in office, or before I took office. Like, look at all these great things. At some point, maybe we as Americans need to kind of point out to our elected officials that if guy A is better than guy B was, or, America is in a better position than it was 4 years ago. And that's what they keep saying. I'm not making their argument for them. I'm just pointing out that if they keep saying that, then at some point, America's great. We can't get any better. We did it all. It's all done. Right. Like by the way that they present this, you might almost think that in our lifetimes, America was a third world country. Like, hey, we did so much better than 4 years ago. Hey, guess what? Another 4 years has passed. Look how great we are. Hey, look how great we are again. Hey, look how great we are again. Like at some point, we hit a ceiling. We have to, because you just can't get any better. Right. Like that's like, that's the logical conclusion of what they do. But no, we just kind of read all this stuff and we're like, wow, yeah, we're in such a great shape. We're so much better to lead than we were, 4 years ago, then 4 years before that, then 4 years before that. Yet we've been leading all of this time. So it's kind of crazy. All right. Anyway, yeah, and I'm sorry that I'm in the way. You won't be able to see it as much. Maybe I can change that real quick, so that I'm not so much in the way here. So let me, bam, I'm still here. I'm just hidden now, folks, so that you can see it. And it says, I know none of this could have been done without you, the American people. Together, we overcame a once in century pandemic and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We've protected and preserved our democracy, and we've revitalized and strengthened our allies around the world. Huh, that's interesting. So, if we have, if we've protected and preserved our democracy, and this happened. So does that make January 6th like not such a big deal now? Like, we didn't lose anything. I know people say, well, we almost lost. Like, one time I almost won the lottery, but so what? I came so close, but then I didn't win. And so now he's like, we've protected and preserved our democracy. Well, okay, great. Well, first of all, protected it from what? Like, what did we like, how did we protect it? How did we preserve it? Just by doing the normal things that we do? Being an ornery bunch of an Americans? Of an Americans. Who is goodness, I need more caffeine in the morning. Can't even talk. But we protected and preserved our democracy. So I would look at it and say, well, guess what? January 6th wasn't such a big deal, because what exactly did we do? Nothing. What, we put some people in jail? Well, hell, we've been doing that forever. So democracy must be great, right, folks? Is that how it works? We've revitalized and strengthened our alliances around the world. Again, that's something that we always say, right? Like, we always hear that. Okay, let's go on to the next one, and I'll move me off here so you can see it now. So let's, boom. There's the next one, and let me read that. And it says, it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. This is probably the most honest line in here. This is probably the most honest line right there. And while it has been my intention to seek reelection, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about my decision. For now, let me express my deepest gratitude to all those who have worked so hard to see me reelected. I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work. And let me express my heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you have placed in me. So he must be talking only to a handful of people there because I put no such faith in him. Okay. But that's what he said. He is stepping down. Now, later, he came out and he endorsed Kamala Harris. So she presumably now will be their nominee. It's yet to be, like, I don't know that it's been formalized just yet. Now, after that, I mean, like, he put that out and man, bam, 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 memes and jokes galore. And they were funny. And I'm not gonna present any of them. I mean, you can get on social media and you can see them all day long, literally all day long. Like there's that many, there's just so many. And some of them are quite mean. They're very mean spirited. And normally I say, like, look, we should try to be nice to one another. And that's generally the rule that I work with. But when it comes to politicians, I actually take a different approach. I say, no, no, you're a politician. This is what you signed up for. But it's more important that it's not just me saying, well, we can make fun of our politicians because they're a politician. And so therefore they get made fun of. Like that's just, there's not really any logic there, but there actually is good logic behind it. So what is it? Well, number one, we have a First Amendment. And that's a big deal here in America. And people outside of America, I don't think they really understand the value. Now, maybe some countries like Australia, Australia probably understands it because they have some limitations that we don't have. I mean, they can actually get in trouble. I think in Indonesia, I think I've read some stories where people criticized their leaders on social media and then got arrested for criticizing. So it's a big deal. We absolutely should be able to make fun of and say whatever we want without legal punishment. Now that doesn't mean that, like, look, if you say something that's really really nasty about my favorite candidate, whoever that candidate be or any candidate for that matter, and I decide that I don't like that and therefore you can never come over to my house again, like, well, that's fine. That's not a First Amendment violation. That's just me saying, like, look, I don't want to hang out with you because you're a very terrible person, and we can do that. And I could do that even with with the president or with just the neighbor or whatever joke you're making. I could say, look, I don't like your type of humor, and I don't want to be your friend. I don't want to associate with you because then people will think that I think your jokes are funny, and whatever. So we could do that. So that's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is the freedom to be able to make the meanest and nastiest jokes toward people that are elected. And that's what our First Amendment is about. And we should never ever be legally punished for making jokes. And we can make some borderline serious jokes. In fact, I can pull one up that I did over the weekend. I thought it was amusing. I guess maybe other people, I mean, I don't know. It didn't really get any traction, and that's fine, probably for the better. But I did make a joke, and I'll show it to you up on the screen here. So let me pull this up really quickly. I'll show you what I said, and we will see if I'm such a nice guy or not. So here that is, and you could. What in the world? That's not supposed to happen. Okay, so I know what happened. I know what happened. Let me pull this out. There we go. Let me fix that, folks. That's really weird. Okay, so technology's being a lot of fun for me today. Okay, so I think I've got it fixed now. So is that right now? Cancel that. Okay, goodness gracious. Give me a second here. I will get this all fixed up and then we will be much better. Okay, I think we're in good shape now. Did I get it right? Yes, I have it right now. Goodness, that was crazy. Technology has been, try not to do things on the fly, I guess. That's the lesson for today. Don't do things live. All right, so here's what I said. Um, so our national chair tweeted out the Libertarian Party has officially chased Biden out. Bye 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 bye. Right, and she's retweeting Biden's official statement that he made and put out on social media. And when she says chased Biden out, that's a play on words because the Libertarian National Party, the National Libertarian Party, has elected Chase Oliver as our candidate for president. And so she's like, hey, we're chasing Biden out. Get it? Uh, and so then I came out and I said, next up, Trump. The Libertarian Party is finally getting their shot, and we don't miss. 2024 is the year of the third parties. So I'm kind of pushing the line there a little bit and, kind of making a joke about the fact that the president was recently shot. And so I'm like, hey, we're getting our shot and we don't miss because, the shooter technically missed. That's as far as I'll go. Now that's a little rude, right? But that's what I said. And I think I I I think that we should absolutely be legally permitted to say these things. And some people will say many, many, things that are much, much worse. Right. So that's me just trying to, do a play on words. I'm not really threatening the president. And so long as you're not making an actual threat of somebody like, I am going to do this, or hey, somebody needs to do this, although that one can be ambiguous. But if you're not making a very direct threat where that person might have to alter the course of their life to ensure their safety, then I say everything goes. That's the point of our First Amendment. So then, like, we have it and we should utilize it. So then that brings up the next question. Why why would we want to use such horrible speech? Well, number one, it maintains balance between citizens and the elected officials. There is a particular power dynamic designed in the nature of our country. And that design is we elect people to govern over us and then they govern over us. They pass legislation. President Biden signs legislation that affects our lives. So he assigned things where I could legally now be in trouble and thrown in jail. And I didn't particularly vote for him, but let's just say that I had. Well, if I had voted for him, I am voting for the guy who may sign legislation that could put me in jail based on, something that I did, or maybe in some cases, maybe didn't do. Right. And so this balance needs to be maintained. And one of the ways that we can maintain that is mocking them and making fun of them for the things that they do. Now, the other one, of course, is to kick them out of office, not elect them in the first place. But I think it goes further than that. We need to make fun of them when they do these kind of things and say, oh, you're power hungry, you're this, whatever, whatever jokes we might want to make, because that keeps the relationship between us and our government where it's supposed to be. That makes sure that they don't become tyrants because they know, hey, that's the way for them to read the room. Right. Because, like, if you think about it, um, let's say that they want to pass some legislation. Let's say for a moment that they want to pass legislation that says you can no longer make fun of the president, and they're talking about it. Okay. Now we could just all email them and say, hey, I don't think you should do that. That's a very bad idea, yada, yada, yada. Or we could hit social media and we could just make jokes left and right. And then they can look out and be like, turns out that's not going to be a good idea. Americans don't want that. Right. And that's when we are unfiltered, they get the best read of the room. And so this is how we maintain that balance, because a lot of these bills, they don't just sign a bill out of nowhere. They don't just say, okay, guess what? We all just sat back here. We read this bill. We didn't put it out publicly. You've never seen it, but we just signed it. And now you have to live by it. And too bad, so sad. That's not how it works. They put it out there. We review it. We criticize it. They debate on it, so on and so forth. Right. Some of what we say gets included in their debate, and then they vote. So this is that balance that we have. And you cannot have that balance if people are not at some point potentially unfiltered about it. Now, some people might make jokes that are just kind of corny and they're lighthearted, but it still presents that same perspective. like that maybe they disagree with something, and other people may disagree in a way that's very, uh, you know, very mean spirited, but that's their choice. Americans can choose how they want to help their elected officials read the room. And so they don't get to determine how we utilize that First Amendment. That's just the way it is. Like we have it, we use it at our discretion. And maybe some people won't. Maybe instead, maybe somebody who supports something that the president or an elected official is going to do, maybe instead of mocking them, they mock their critics. And that's fine too. Like this is the whole point. We have to have very vigorous debate on all matters relating to government. Period. And then the other reason, and this, like maybe you'll disagree, but I think humor is just good for us. It helps us keep perspective. I mean, I want you to think about it. Like if I can laugh at myself, then that means I'm willing to take a critical, some critical idea and think about it. And I don't get too bothered by it. And it's good for us. It helps all of us stay in a good place. And I've talked about this before. One of the things that I've said in the past is if you want to know about intergroup relationships, like say race relations and whatnot, then I want you to think about what kind of jokes can you make? And that tells you about your relationship with that other group. So if I can't make any jokes about your group, any, zero, no jokes, then that says that I don't have a good relationship with your group. So think about it like this. I'm a short guy. I'm 5'3". I'm like 120 pounds, soaking wet, wearing a backpack and holding my son, right? Like I'm a scrawny little fellow. So if you can make fun of me for being a small guy, number one, if I can take it, then I have good confidence in myself. Number two, if I don't get bent out of shape necessarily, like if you're just an individual, like friend of mine and you make a joke and you're like, how's the weather down there, little guy? Something, that's kind of corny, but off the top of my head. But if you make a joke and I don't get bent out of shape, that not only says something about me, but it says something about you. It says something about our relationship. It says that yes, we have the proper relationship where you can make fun of me for things, and then I can hear them, so it allows us to keep perspective with each other, with ourselves. Humor is a good thing. We need humor. We need to be able to laugh at ourselves. And then laughing at ourselves allows us to move forward to some introspection. So if you make fun, I'm trying to think off I didn't think about, I didn't think about a good analogy before the show, but so I'm going to try to do this right now. Just think of it right now and do it. So imagine that I'm griping about how high things are. I go to the grocery store and I'm like, man, the shelves are too high and I have to like stand on my tippy toes, to grab them. I'm griping and I'm throwing a big fit about it. I'm complaining to you. And then you come back and you make some sort of joke about it, right? Well, maybe your joke is about you're a tall person and your joke is about how how nice it would be if you didn't have to bend over and hurt your back to pick up something off the bottom the bottom of the bottom shelf. Right. And again, I'm trying to do this on the fly, so bear with me, folks. So you make this joke about me and you include something along that line with it. So now you and I both have a good laugh. And then I take a moment for introspection and I go, okay, well, I have it one way, you have it another way. And so it helps me keep a little bit of perspective. Like, yeah, it sucks to be short, but if I was super, super tall, there might be some challenges there too. And so this helps keep us grounded. And so we need humor, right? It's more than just a good laugh, although that's a positive and a benefit as well. But it also helps us just to keep perspective of who we are. And so going back to the citizen and the elected official, if I'm an elected official and I get made fun of, then one, I need to have some confidence in myself. But then number two, I need to be able to sit down and go, okay, what is this person saying about me? And maybe I need to rethink some things. Maybe they're right. Like, maybe that joke they made about me, is a little harsh, but maybe there's some truth to it that I need to recognize. So for me, all of this humor, and some of it's pretty toilet, pretty potty humor, right? But all of it says something that can be of value if we let it. Now, well, maybe all of it's a little bit strong. Maybe say most of it, right? But I think there's a learning opportunity from humor, if we let it. So I think I'm okay with this. I may not share everything. I may cringe internally and say, "Woo, that one was a little too much for me," right? But that's okay. Somebody else might look at it and say, "Man, that was hysterical. I love it," And then hopefully, our elected officials, they get the message. They hear what we're saying, and this is why you might remember a long time ago. I think it was last year. I went to our local city council and I basically harangued our city council, specifically the city council president at the time, because he was known for being heavy-handed when citizens would come in during the public comment portion of the meeting. Citizens would come in and sometimes they would drop an F bomb or they would say some other unsavory words when they were, expressing their feelings about what city council was doing, what they weren't doing, about certain legislation and so on and so forth, right? So people would come in and they would speak passionately. And sometimes that included unsavory language, some profanities and whatnot. And they would get shut down by the president of the city council. So I went in and I basically criticized him. And because what I had noticed is that a lot of them will sit there like this while you're talking. They'll be like, "Mhm, yep, mhm, yeah, 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 yeah." And so they're really not listening. So I was like, well, I don't know why you're getting angry about people saying profanities when you're not really listening in the first place. Like you're not paying attention to the citizens. So, and then you shut them down when they say something offensive. And so I went in and I challenged him about that. And, I was a bit abrasive to the point where I forced the president of the city council to respond to me. Now, I didn't like his response. I think it was a cop out, personally. In that particular case, I was just like, you know, I said, I said, what are the rules here specifically? And, I was specifically asking them some questions and they didn't answer. And then I finally kind of got really abrasive and I was like, I believe I'm talking to you, Mr. President. like I kind of demanded that he respond. And then he was like, oh, well, you can ask questions, but we're not allowed to respond. And then I later looked and I was like, I'm not really seeing that in the rules. And then I emailed them and I said, hey, I'm not hearing anything and I'm not clear on this, and then not a single one responded back. So clearly I need to go back and give them more hell, right? I need to send some more emails until I get a friggin' answer. But this is the point. The point is we have to, it's our job as citizens to make sure that they maintain perspective of who they are. We elected them. They're not just there to make rules however they darn well feel, right? They're there at our behest. And so we need to keep in constant communication. And part of it will be humor. And I mean, sometimes it'll just be anger, right? Like, same difference as far as I'm concerned. So whether your humor is really, lighthearted or whether it's very mean spirited, whatever, you're sending a message. Or if I go in and I complain and I say, you know, I don't think you should pass this bill because it's a very bad bill and it's going to do X, Y, and Z. And I think that's inappropriate. Thank you for your time. You could say that, or you could go in and be like, how dare you, you SOB, that's a terrible bill. Now, and you go on and you carry on. Now, I will say, like, we should be trying to send an actual message. So, I mean, I don't think we should just go in and just cuss them out and then not actually tell them what we don't like about something, right? Same with humor. I think the humor should, this is, and I'm saying should, not has to, right? But it should do that. But sometimes it won't. And that's what they signed up for. Now, I want to give you a side note. I actually apply this to anybody who's in power or in the public eye. You are subject to ridicule. That includes, say, podcasters like myself. So I don't take it as a super insult when somebody's like, they're criticizing me. I mean, I might, but I don't get too bent out of shape because I'm like, this is what I signed up for. This is the feedback that I'm getting. And it's not always going to be pleasant. Sometimes I just roll my eyes, right? I have to learn, when is the feedback of value? When is it not? And a lot of times so far, it's not really valuable, usually because it's coming from somebody who doesn't even watch the show anyway. So, but again, I apply this concept to anybody in power or in the public eye, because you have basically said, I want to have some level of imbalance in the world compared to you. So I have decided that I want a podcast to talk about my opinions, hopefully influence other people, right? Maybe gain a bazillion followers, people that love the show. And since I have chosen that, it's not really much different than government. The only difference is I'm not being elected, but I am getting feedback. And that feedback is based on my desire to influence. So if you're in the public eye, if you're in power, then you are subject to all manner of ridicule. And that's the way it is. And so I will always support, people's, I will always support people. My, oh no, I was looking at something on the screen, distracted me. I apologize, folks. But I will always support the freedom of speech, even if it's harsh. That doesn't mean that I'll always agree with it. And I might say, hey, you really probably shouldn't have said that. But that's just my personal opinion. That's not me saying, I think you should be banned or I think you should, be thrown in jail. None of that stuff. So I want more speech out there, but that also means that I have the right to say, okay, I think you took that one a little bit too far. And maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but that's the conversation that we have. So Biden is out. Make fun of him. Kamala apparently is in. I don't know if the Democrat Party will make any changes. I suspect they won't, but they might. And I, I would, if I were, in charge or had some level of influence in the Democratic Party, I would be like, okay, not her. I don't think she's going to beat Trump, but we'll see. I think she will play the race card. I think I've seen a few people already make comments like, "Oh, if you wouldn't vote for a black woman, then you're a terrible racist." And then I look back and I say, "Well, that seems kind of crazy." But here, I will tell you this: if people say that, just bring up Condoleezza Rice. You might say, "What does that have to do with anything?" Condoleezza Rice is a black woman. She was I don't remember what role she had, but it was like back in 2000, early 2000s. And in 2008, people actively wanted her to run as the Republican, for president for the Republican Party. And she declined. And then people like got together and they created this like draft Condi movement. And they were going to try to, I don't know, I'm not really sure how they expected that to play out, but there was this movement that were like, hey, let's all get together and draft Condi as our presidential nominee. And I thought that was interesting. And I think it bears value today when when the Democratic Party wants to say, well, we've got a black woman, we'll be the first party ever. Well, yes, sort of, but not really. You're actually kind of behind the times, Democrats, because people wanted Condoleezza Rice to run back in 2008. And I believe prior to that, um, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank on it. Colin Powell, Secretary of the Army, uh, he was discussing it. No, I'm trying to remember here. I'm doing this one off the cuff as well. I believe he was considering running. And then I believe his wife had said, I don't have a good feeling about this. Let's not. And then I believe he said he declined, but he was considering it. And there were a lot of people that actually wanted him to run. So the Republican Party, so if we're going to talk about race, we're going to bring that into it. That's fine. But the Republican Party has already been there. somewhat, at least the people, maybe not the party itself, but the people, the voters, Republican voters were already there. They already were thinking about a black man and then a black woman. So when the Democratic Party tries to tout, their DEI candidate and how great they are because they'll be the first ones. I mean, strictly speaking, they'll be the first ones to nominate. And if she were to win, they would be the first ones to ensure a black woman as president. But let's not get it twisted. The Republicans actually beat them in a sense. The Republican Party, the members, the voters, they were already there years ago, almost a decade ago. So hit them hard, folks. Make fun of them and their DEI candidate. All right, let's do a bill review real quick. We're going to do a bill review because I think this is a good bill to talk about. So, what do we have here? Let me pull this up on the screen. And where are you here? Is it up? Nothing wants to work for me today, but that's okay. We're gonna get past it here. So this comes from Forbes. I saw this. Why is my? We're tried. Is it not working? Hello. It's not working. Um, how about that? There we are. About freaking time. Goodness. Everything is not working today the way that it's supposed to. I'm just going to blame technology. I'm just going to say it's CrowdStrike. That's what I'm doing. CrowdStrike's causing me problems. Everybody else get to blame them. I don't, fine. I'll blame them as well. So here's this article. Florida becomes 21st state with universal licensure. Now, what does that mean? And let's zoom in on that so that you can see it a little bit better. All right. So there we go. Okay. Yes, it's my last free article. All right. So I cover the intersection of state and federal policy and politics. I might have to keep up with this guy. So here's what's going on. During the nearly 6 years that Governor Ron DeSantis has been in office, Florida has moved from a battleground state to a solidly red state. Unlike counterparts such as Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, who has had to overhaul an uncompetitive tax code and fight for a number of other reforms to make her state more economically competitive, Governor DeSantis had the fortune of taking the helm of a state that, thanks to efforts and achievements of predecessors like Jeb Bush, already had one of the nation's most attractive tax and regulatory climates. Cool. All right, let me skip down here. We don't need to read that. So, in signing Senate Bill 1600 on June 28th, for example, Governor Ron DeSantis made Florida the latest state to reduce barriers to employment by recognizing occupational licenses from other states. 20 states have already enacted similar legislation, commonly referred to as Universal License Recognition, ULR. But as the nation's fastest growing state, Florida needed this reform more than any. Arizona lawmakers enacted the nation's first ULR bill in 2019, and the benefits are already evident. In the 5 years since then, Governor Doug Ducey signed the first ULR bill into law. More than 10,000 licensed professionals across a host of industries and trades have begun working in Arizona thanks to this reform. So, what are we talking about here? Universal license reform. All that is saying if you are from another state and you are licensed, then you can work in our state. That's it. That's really what it's about. Now, the different states will have different requirements and things that maybe they're looking for to verify it, right? And maybe have some different criteria. So let's take a quick look at the bill. I'm only going to do a quick look because honestly, the bill is itself a bit dry and kind of boring, and there's nothing there's nothing in there that's going to be like, oh wow, that's very very interesting, right? It's going to be kind of like run of the mill legislation. But we're going to take a quick look because that's what we do here. We still at least take a brief look. So here's the bill. Finally, something's working correctly. All right. So the bill is 25 pages. So it breaks my heart already because it's way too long. It was way too long to say if you have a license in Georgia, then you can work in Florida. That's just crazy. So we'll skim down here and we'll just kind of take a look at some of the stuff that it says. So again, just so you know, all of this here is this is like the very beginning of the bill. It just kind of tells you about the bill, what it's going to do. So it's kind of like, summary of the bill in a sense. And then here, be it enacted by the legislature of the state of Florida, and then it goes into the statute, the language that they're using in this legislation. So, as I like to make sure that everybody always knows when you're reading these things, if it's underlined, that's additions to existing statute. If it's stricken, then it's removing something. And then if it's just normal, like lines 71 through 74 here, then that is existing statute. So that's one of the reasons why they're 25 pages, because they're probably either adding a lot or they're making a lot of changes to existing statute. Because sometimes things are, you have to make changes in different parts of the statute in order for it to make sense and not create any legal problems, because then people will challenge it later and say, well, it says over here one thing, but over here it says another thing. And so now there's a conflict. So the law isn't so clear. So they're going through here, and here's where, here's kind of the meat of it in a sense. Before the board or the department, if there is no board, may deny an application for licensure by reciprocity or by endorsement. The board or the department, if there is no board, must make a finding that the basis license in another jurisdiction is or is not substantially equivalent to or is otherwise insufficient for a license in the state. So they're basically saying, like, look, we have to make a determination. Like, are the requirements in this other state sufficient for us? And so that's already a thing I don't particularly care for. Then it says, if the board or the department, if there is no board, finds that the basis license in another jurisdiction is not substantially equivalent to or is otherwise insufficient for a license in the state, and there are no other grounds to deny the application for licensure, within 7 days after being notified of such finding, the applicant may request that the finding be submitted to the secretary for review within 7 business days. After receiving such request, the secretary must review the finding and either agree or disagree with the finding. If the secretary agrees with the finding, the application for licensure may be denied. If the secretary disagrees with the finding, the application for licensure must be approved unless other grounds for denial exist. The decision must be entered according to the secretary's finding unless other grounds for denial exist. So basically, they're saying, like, look, we have a body, and in Florida we call it the DBPR, Department. I can't remember it's the licensing board. They're the ones that oversee it, DBPR. And so basically, they're going to review and say, okay, if you're in Georgia and you want to be, say, a roofer, what are the requirements there? Are they satisfactory for us? And if they are, then yay, you are permitted to now work in Florida. If they're not, then the roofer or whomever, there's an appeal process, and you can say, look, I think you've got this wrong, and they can submit it to, they can request that the secretary of the state review this, and then the secretary actually has 7 days. So I can do it within 7 days. So if I get a rejection letter, if I'm from out of state, I can get a rejection letter, and then I can say, okay, well, I've got 7 days to respond. So then I can respond and request that the secretaries take a second look. And then the secretary has 7 days from receipt of that in order to respond. And they have to determine, okay, do they agree with the governing body, the board, or whatever group is overseeing this, or do they not? And if they do agree, then bam, case closed. If they don't agree, then then they have to immediately grant me permission to work in the state unless there's some other reason, right? And so you can go through and you can read this bill and find all the details. They're calling it interstate mobility, and then they also make out here, and is it this part of it? So they also talk about, like, if there's, in some states, you don't actually necessarily get licensed in a formal way. So I believe there are 4 states in the US where you don't actually have to go to school, I believe, in order to get a legal license. And you can actually be an apprentice, and there's a different path for that. Right. So then they might look and say, well, okay, in one of these states, they don't have to go to school, and we require that you go to school to practice law. But what are their requirements, and are those requirements basically satisfactory? So they have a provision in there for businesses where maybe the licensing, requirements are different, or whatever the case may be, right? So there's some language in here that kind of is flexible. However, I'm gonna argue that the language is really unnecessary, and that they're still complicating this bill, because in my opinion, you simply, like, here's how Florida should do it, in my opinion. They should simply say, "Do you have a valid license in another state?" That's it. Or does the state require if they require a license, do you have a valid license? Yes? Great. Can you show that you've completed some work? Any work, one job, right? That way we know that you've received your license and you've done some work that has not been challenged, right? And then no recent arrest or civil complaints regarding your work. Okay. And now, why would I make these and why would I impose this? And some of my libertarians will will be upset about this, maybe. The idea behind the licensing, the argument that is made, is that we're trying to protect people. And if you look up licensing roofing in Florida, you will find tons of stories of roofers who have scammed people. Tons of them. They're just all over, and a lot of these are unlicensed people, so they're not licensed, so they're not. So the problem that you run into is, if you're licensed and you scam somebody, you could lose your license, right? But if you're not licensed and you scam somebody, as long as you can get away with it, then you're fine. But so you didn't have to go through all the effort to get a license to scam somebody. so so there's kind of like a short way. It's a way around putting all the time in so that you can create a scam. So a lot of them will be unlicensed. And so there's tons of stories. So the argument that's made for licensing, which I don't necessarily agree with, the argument that's made is we need to protect people. Well, as pretty much everybody has a story to tell, people with licenses do bad work, and people with licenses also try to scam people in some way. Right? It may not be the most egregious scam, but it happens. So a license doesn't actually guarantee that I'm going to get good work for one reason or another. It could be that the person's just not a very good worker. Could be that they were lazy on this particular job, but they've done other jobs very well, right? There have been cases where we've personally experienced where one contractor that we're using is focusing more on another job that they have at our expense, right? So there's any number of reasons why a license doesn't necessarily guarantee good work. And so about the only value that you have for a license is that if I do something illegal, I can lose my license. Okay? So that's not, to me, that's not a great incentive structure. So for me, I look at it and just say, okay, since we're talking about licensing, we'll start with that. And I think the first step for Florida, if we're going to do this in an incremental way, is to say, well, we currently have a licensing structure here in the state. So how do we balance that with allowing people out of state to work? So the first thing that we do is we say, do you have a valid license, or are you valid to work in that state in this particular industry? If you are, great. Can you show completed work? Just one job, just show us. Like, hey, yep, I did this job over here. Look at the roof. Here's me doing the roof. Here's me hammering, whatever. Right. Like, so you show you show that you've done some work. And then just, there's no recent arrest or civil complaints regarding your work. That way it protects people from another state in the simplest way possible. Because I believe that the role of government is to intervene when there's conflict with citizens. I don't, and I'm not so confident that all of their schemes, all of their laws and licensing requirements and all these other things, I'm not convinced that it necessarily guarantees that I'm not going to get scammed or that I get good work. And how can I prove that? Well, again, if you just go look up roofing scam Florida. Just type that into Google. You will find plenty of stories that people already are trying. Like, people get scammed all the time, and we have a licensing structure here in Florida. So it's clearly not exactly working. And the argument might be, well, it would be even worse, but that's speculative argument. I don't deal in that kind of speculation. So I can only deal in what we have now. What we have now is that we have a licensing requirement for many things, and you it's no guarantee that you're going to get good work, or that the person like there's any number of ways that scammers try to get around that. So it's not a guarantee. But I do want to make it easier for people that come from out of town to do work. Why is that? Well, Florida, as we all know, has hurricanes. And sometimes when the hurricanes come through, there's more work to be done than we have contractors necessarily. And it would be unwise if we just had a bazillion contractors just sitting and waiting, right, for hurricane to come through and create a lot of work. So clearly the answer is that people from out of state who maybe don't have a lot of work on their plate can come over here and do some work. And that's it. And so like that's the value add in making sure that people from other states can come here and work. And let me show you a story, because I think I hope, and I haven't dug into the bill enough to know whether or not this bill would have prevented this particular story from happening. I'm not entirely certain just yet, because I don't know all the particulars. Yeah, I'd have to match up all the particulars of the bill with all of the particulars of the story. But it's a possibility that it could have prevented it, because it's an absurd story. So let's go back, and we're going to pull that up here real quick. And we're going to take a look at this story, which was very unfortunate. So there we are. Okay, perfect. Look at that. Things are starting to work a little bit better for me today. So, Houston area roofing business owner arrested in Florida for allegedly doing unlicensed repair work after Hurricane Ian. Terrence Duke, I'm going to call it Duke, 48, whose Rosenberg based company is accredited by the Better Business Bureau, faces a felony charge in Charlotte County, Florida. His arrest was criticized by some on social media. I was probably one of those people. This was back in 2022. Picture of some work that needs to be done. The owner of a Houston roofing company is facing criminal charges in Florida for allegedly doing unlicensed business there in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian. Terrence Duke, the owner of Rosenberg-based Duke Roofing, was arrested October 7th. He was arrested and charged with engaging in contracting business without certification during a state of emergency, a felony, according to online court records in Charlotte County in southwestern Florida. Duke bonded out of jail that same day and is scheduled to appear before a Florida judge on November 7th, court records show. The announcement of Duke's arrest by local authorities in Florida, which suggested his company was attempting to victimize people who had been impacted by the recent storm, prompted backlash from social media users who said Duke Roofing instead appeared to be helping to fulfill a need for repairs and construction work in the wake of the natural disaster. Now, let's talk about something here. They said that the local authorities said he was attempting to victimize people based on what? That he wasn't licensed? That's it? No, that's unacceptable. We as citizens need to reject that. This would have been a good time for some of those mean-spirited memes to make fun of our local officials and say, seriously, you're going to put a felony on somebody for trying to do work, legitimate work, who has a legitimate business in another state and just wanted to A, make a little extra money, and B, help people out in the process. Like, and that's going to be a felony? No, that's unacceptable. And we should have absolutely rejected that. And I'm glad that that it made the news, that social media took issue with this, because we should. On October 9th, Twitter posted by an October 9th Twitter post by the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. By the way, here, folks, I just want to point out. Let me get back to it real quick. I'm going to interrupt myself here. Let's see here. That Liberty lady, thank you so much. You did point out earlier. I just didn't get to it yet. But DBPR, Department of Business and Professional Regulation, that's here in Florida. So thank you so much for that. But I wanted to make sure that you got credit because you said it first before I read it. But the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, which showed Duke being handcuffed by a Charlotte County Sheriff's Office deputy, prompted a Twitter user to reply, "Are you aware that you're the bad guys?" I wonder if I'm the one that said that. If I didn't say it, somebody else did. That's a good person. And that is absolutely correct. You are the bad guys. A media relations representative for Charlotte County Sheriff's Office did not respond Thursday to a request for comment and additional information. Beth Panel, a spokesperson for the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, wrote in an email that qualified contractors wishing to do business in the state can apply for licenses with the department, which is expediting the review of applicants so they can get to work on recovery efforts. Here is my solution. You simply pass legislation that says, again, if you're if you legitimately are permitted to work in another state in this particular industry, and you can show that you've completed some work, that basically means we know that you've actually done some work. You didn't just go and get a license or get, you've because anybody that's worked in any industry knows that just because you went to school, just because you read some stuff, watched a YouTube video, doesn't mean that you actually can put that into practice. So we want to make sure that you've actually done some work before you come over here and you help people out who have just been through a hurricane. Because the last thing that people need in the state of Florida is somebody coming from, say, Texas, California, or any state for that matter, but particularly anyone that's further away, which makes it harder to recoup if there's a problem. But we want to make sure that anybody that's coming from out of state to come and help out is not going to leave that person in a position where they have to fight even harder if the work isn't done correctly. Because if you come over, let's just call it from Georgia. Let's just say you're from the northern part of Georgia. Okay. We'll just put it that way. You're from the northern part of Georgia. You come and and you say, "Hey, DL, I would like to, I think I can fix that roof damage that you have there. And I've got a business in Georgia." And I might say, "Okay, how much you want to do it?" And they say, "We want to do it for, I don't know, $500, $500." And I go, "Wow, that's not a bad price at all. I'm going to totally hire you to do that." And then you do it. And let's just say that you cut a corner and that corner causes me a problem later. I have a leak later in that same spot that you did the work. Well, now I have to figure out how to get a hold of you and get you from Northern Georgia back here to repair the work. So I think it's fair to say you got to show some completed work. I also think it's fair to say you shouldn't have any recent arrest or civil complaints regarding this type of work. Now, if it's unrelated to the work, like completely unrelated, I'm not so worried. If you didn't pay your taxes and you're a roofer, I'm not so worried because, like, okay, you didn't pay your taxes. Do you do good roof work? Okay, great. The government can deal with your taxes, which taxation is theft anyway, but the government can deal with that. I don't have to worry about that. Nor should Florida necessarily impose upon you to, impose that problem upon me and you, right? To deal with. Because again, if a hurricane rips through Florida, we're looking for contractors. We need people to be able to work, and we need to make it as streamlined, as simple as possible. So that's my argument. I don't mind the bill. I like the bill. It's a nice in a way. I like the bill, but I don't like the bill. I like the bill in that it's a step forward. I don't like the bill in that I still see that it has, I don't think it's as easy as it should be. It should be, it can still be easier, and it should be. And when it comes to legislation, this is why I do the bill reviews. So we can read them, we can talk about them, we can say, what should be in this bill? Should this even be a bill? Right? Maybe in some cases, I reject the bill altogether and I say, no, the bill is not good at all. In this particular case, I'm going to say it's a nice step forward, and we can't stop here. We need to go and say, all right, how can we make it even simpler? But at the same time, not, not leaving our Florida citizens at risk necessarily of having to fight to bring somebody, from another state or whatever. And I know there's arguments. People say, well, in that case, then we should make it harder. That way they know they're getting more. No, there's always a risk. There's always a risk that we have to take. So we want to make it as simple as possible. And then any impediment needs to be the simplest impediment to attempt to ensure that we're getting somebody that's going to do the job and do it correctly. That's it. That's all that matters. Do the job, do it correctly, be honest. And so the simplest path for me is the path that we want to seek. So my bill review today is kind of like I'm in the middle. I kind of support the bill and I've kind of am like, you know, I kind of don't. It's kind of, this might be the first. This might be the first one. No, I think there was a bill or two before where I was like, yeah, I kind of like the bill, but I kind of don't. But usually I try to make it a yes or a no. So that's where we are, folks. Let's take some comments here. See, sometimes you have to be rude, Liberty Dad. That is true. Sometimes you do have to be rude. Let's see what else here. Uh, good libertarian, bad libertarian. Yeah. Is that like a good cop, bad cop kind of a thing? I mean, should I compare cops to libertarians? I think we get in trouble for that. I think people get angry. There's probably going to be somebody angry at me for saying that. But yeah, there are some good libertarians, there are some bad libertarians, and sometimes if that's the intent of the comment, um, sometimes there are libertarians that are a little bit nicer, and sometimes there are ones that are a little bit meaner. Good morning, producer. My producer's here. And that's just the way it goes. So, all right, folks. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you are also subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. Doesn't apply to politicians, however. Have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.